The roar of engines yanked me awake at 6:00 a.m. I rushed to the window and my heart dropped. Lena Caldwell, the HOA president, was standing there with a smug grin, watching as workers unloaded rolls of barbed wire. They weren't just installing a fence, they were building a towering wall of razor-sharp steel across my property, completely blocking my gate. The sound of chainsaws and hammers filled the air as they worked, not a care in the world for what they were about to do. What Lena didn't realize was that her grand security project was about to backfire big time. That road she was cutting off, it wasn't just mine, it was the only way in or out of the entire neighborhood, and now she had just sealed off everyone's escape route. 47 families, one road, and I owned every single foot of it. Lena thought she could trap me, but what she didn't know was she had just trapped herself and every single neighbor. What do you do when the people in charge think they've won, but they've actually locked themselves in? You're about to find out. Lena Caldwell wasn't the kind of person you could ignore. From the moment she arrived at Pine Ridge Estates, I could tell she was here to claim more than just her oversized house. At 49, with her tailored suits and the "I'm in charge" smirk, she was exactly what you'd expect from a suburban HOA president, someone who saw herself as a judge and jury for everyone's lives. And she made sure you knew it. The first time I saw her in action was the day she showed up at my cabin with a clipboard ready to discuss my gate. She stared at it for a long moment, like it was some kind of eyesore, before finally speaking up. "Your gate, Marcus. It's a bit too rustic. The community has a standard, and we simply can't have eyesores like this affecting property values." I couldn't help but laugh, even though there was no humor in it. This iron gate had been here since 1987, and I wasn't about to let her or anyone else dictate what could stand on my land. "It's not an HOA issue," I said, trying to keep my cool. "It's my private property. I'm not part of your association." But Lena didn't flinch. Instead, she tapped her clipboard and tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Geography creates mutual responsibilities, Marcus. You'll need to comply. We can always bring this up at the next meeting if you're not interested in resolving it privately." I knew exactly what that meant. The HOA was already preparing to make my life a living hell, but I wasn't going to be intimidated. I'd spent enough years dealing with real threats. This HOA nonsense wasn't going to break me. 2 weeks later, a county inspector showed up. Apparently, Lena had filed a complaint about my gate being an environmental hazard and a security risk because it was made of iron. The inspector didn't even try to hide his confusion when he arrived at my cabin. He inspected the property and left within 20 minutes with nothing to report. But the damage had already been done. The HOA had already started spreading their narrative. Marcus was the problem, not Lena and her group of entitled suburbanites. From that moment, I knew Lena wasn't just a minor annoyance. She was an unstoppable force. And she wasn't about to stop until I was either pushed out or forced to bow to her will. The thing about Lena Caldwell was that she didn't just want power, she wanted control. And she was willing to destroy anyone standing in her way. The first letter from the HOA arrived a week after I refused to comply with Lena's demands to update my gate. It was official, professionally printed, and filled with passive-aggressive language designed to make me feel like I was the problem. "Dear Mr. Carver, we have noticed that your property fails to meet the aesthetic standards of Pine Ridge Estates. Specifically, the rustic gate installed on your property is deemed incompatible with the community vision. As a valued member of the neighborhood, we kindly request that you upgrade your gate to comply with our pre-approved contractors." I crumpled it up and threw it in the trash, but I knew this wouldn't be the last time they'd try to bully me. What I didn't know was how far Lena would go to get what she wanted. A few days later, another letter arrived, this time with threats. Failure to comply will result in escalating fines and potential legal action. A county inspector will be assigned to your property. I didn't even bother responding this time. Instead, I turned my attention to the trees surrounding the cabin, trying to ignore the looming presence of Lena's HOA army. But that didn't last long. Soon enough, I noticed Lena, clipboard in hand, marching up my driveway with a team of women trailing behind her. She was always surrounded by her supporters, a group of suburban housewives who took it upon themselves to patrol the neighborhood in their yoga pants, armed with measuring tapes and passive-aggressive smiles. "Good morning, Marcus," Lena called out, her voice dripping with fake sweetness as she scanned my gate with exaggerated concern. "I just wanted to make sure you received our latest letter about your gate. We've had a lot of complaints, and the community's really concerned." I nodded curtly, still holding my ground. "Lena, I told you already this is private property. Your HOA has no say in what I do with my gate or my land." Her smile didn't falter. "I understand. But you see, Marcus, your gate is affecting property values. The community needs to be cohesive. It's for everyone's benefit." She paused, tapping her clipboard, letting the silence hang in the air for a moment. "We'll be filing the formal complaint with the county next week, if nothing changes." That's when I realized just how much power she thought she had. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. This was about Lena's need to control every inch of the neighborhood. She was playing a game, and she had just escalated it. The next few days were filled with more visits from Lena and her HOA enforcers. They drove by my cabin, peering out of their cars, making sure I was still standing firm. When they weren't around the neighborhood, whispers began. The once friendly faces I had known for years started to change when I passed them in the street. "Is everything okay with your place?" Marcus, one neighbor, asked, but there was an edge to her tone, like she was asking more out of obligation than concern. Another neighbor didn't even make eye contact as I waved. I could feel the pressure building. The HOA had spread rumors about my gate, about my property, and now they were planting the seeds of doubt about me. I was the problem. I was the one making things difficult. In the quiet of my workshop, the sound of my grandfather's old tools creaking as I worked gave me a small sense of calm. But outside, things were escalating. The HOA wasn't just trying to change my gate, they were changing how everyone viewed me. And the worst part was, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was about to become the neighborhood villain. I'd hoped the HOA would back off, but it only got worse. A few weeks later, I received a formal letter from the HOA board accusing me of violating multiple community standards. The language was more aggressive this time, detailing the alleged violations of my property's aesthetic integrity and security risks. The letter went so far as to accuse my gate of being a hazardous structure, a claim that made me roll my eyes. But as I read it, I realized something: they were playing the long game. Delilah had enlisted the entire HOA board to back her decision. The letter stated that the HOA was now demanding I attend an official hearing to explain myself. If I didn't show up, they'd pursue legal action to resolve the matter. This time, I wasn't about to back down. I contacted a lawyer, Jake Morrison, an old friend from my Army days, who now specialized in property law. After reviewing the HOA's complaint, Jake confirmed what I already knew: Lena and her board had no legal right to control my gate or my land. They had no easement, no rights of access, and no authority to force me into compliance. But the HOA didn't stop there. Lena wasn't about to let things go. She filed a complaint with the county, claiming my road access violated the community's shared easement agreements. She said the road, which had been privately owned by my family for generations, now served as a public service road to the rest of the neighborhood. That was the moment I realized the game had changed. This wasn't about my gate anymore, it was about my land. Lena and the HOA board were playing the long con, trying to claim my private property as theirs. They wanted control over the only road connecting Pine Ridge Estates to the highway. It was a power grab. I started looking into it. The more I dug, the more I uncovered. I went through the property deeds and land records my grandfather had kept in his surveyor's case. There it was, plain as day, no easement, no agreement. The road was entirely mine, and Lena had no legal claim to it. But the HOA wasn't backing off. At the next community meeting, Lena painted me as a troublemaker, someone who was refusing to cooperate with the HOA's vision for the neighborhood. She had the board in her pocket, and the rumor mill was already turning. The new residents, most of whom were loyal to Lena's vision of a pristine, cookie-cutter neighborhood, bought into her narrative. It wasn't just a gate anymore. Now Lena was trying to claim my land as part of her vision for a perfect community, and the HOA was backing her every step of the way. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting to keep my home, my legacy, and my rights intact. The HOA had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them win without a fight. After Lena's official complaint, things escalated quickly. I could feel the noose tightening. The HOA had enlisted the entire board to go after me, but I wasn't about to let them bully me into submission. I knew the legal ramifications weren't in their favor, but their next move proved just how far they were willing to go. In the weeks following the complaint, I started receiving visit after visit from county inspectors, each one more pressing than the last. At first I tried to ignore it. These were all distractions, I told myself. But each time I opened the door to one of those well-dressed county employees, I could see it in their eyes: they were taking Lena's complaints seriously. One afternoon the doorbell rang, and standing there in his gray county uniform was the latest inspector. He handed me a notice from the county, which confirmed that the HOA had reported me for violations against the community's road access, and claimed my gate was impeding public safety. Mr. Carver, the HOA, filed a formal complaint, saying, "Your private road is obstructing access to the development and is a potential hazard to residents," the inspector explained, with a barely hidden look of discomfort. "We're required to investigate." We've received reports of delays in emergency response times as a result of your gate and road. I could feel my blood pressure rising as he spoke, but I remained calm. Let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice steady. The HOA is claiming that my private road is a public easement and that my gate is preventing emergency vehicles from accessing the neighborhood, the same gate that's been standing here for decades. He looked down at the clipboard and his hands nervously tapping his pen. I'm just here to do my job, sir. You can appeal this at the next hearing. I bit my tongue to keep from snapping. This wasn't just a violation of property rights anymore. This was a coordinated attempt to seize control of my land, and the county was being dragged into it. The inspector left, and I wasted no time contacting Jake again. I wasn't going to let Lena use her influence to bend the rules, but the situation had now taken on a new dimension. The HOA had successfully manipulated the county to send inspectors after me, and it felt like a full-on campaign of harassment. I started tracking every instance, every complaint, and each new violation they invented against me. I gathered all my evidence and began to prepare. Jake helped me understand that the HOA's claims about my road being a public easement were completely unfounded. There was no official agreement granting them any rights over my property, and I was well within my rights to block access. But I had to make sure I had the legal documentation to back me up when the next battle inevitably came. I went through my grandfather's old files, spending hours in the dim light of my workshop looking for anything that would give me the upper hand. As I dug deeper, I found a series of letters from the original developers of Pine Ridge Estates. They were dated from the 1982nd and detailed agreements between my grandfather and the developers about the land and roads in the area. My heart raced as I read through them. The letters confirmed what I'd suspected. My grandfather had made an agreement with the developers, but it was limited. The roads, including the one connecting to the highway, were private property, and no easement had ever been granted. The discovery was a game changer. Armed with this evidence, I filed a formal complaint of my own, with the county demanding that they halt the inspection process and recognize my property rights. But Lena and the HOA weren't backing down. A few weeks later, the HOA sent another formal letter threatening legal action if I didn't remove my gate and allow access to my land. They were doubling down, using every piece of influence they had to force me into submission. The letter was full of legal jargon designed to intimidate, and they were pushing the idea that the road and gate were necessary for public access to their development. But it was clear that Lena wasn't concerned with the facts. She was concerned with getting what she wanted, no matter the cost. The HOA board was completely under her control. They were happy to let her wage this war without any concern for the consequences. It became increasingly clear that the HOA wasn't just trying to force me to change my gate. They were after something bigger, my land. They wanted control of the road. They wanted the entire area to be part of their vision for Pine Ridge Estates, and they didn't care how they got it. The more I researched, the more I realized that Lena had been building a network of influence within the HOA to push her agenda. She had made deals with certain members of the board, and had even manipulated the development's financial structure to secure her own vision of what Pine Ridge Estates should be. I spent the next few days digging through the property records in search of something, anything that could give me leverage, and that's when I found it. Buried deep within the legal documents were a series of agreements that referenced the road and the development's access points. The original developers had planned to use the road as a means of connecting the entire community to the highway, but the agreements were clear it was a private road. No easements were ever granted, and the right-of-way was solely mine. I took the findings to Jake, who confirmed what I already knew. Lena's trying to pull a fast one, he said. She's trying to force an easement agreement onto your land without any legal grounds. And now that she's got the HOA backing her, she thinks she can bully you into giving up your property rights. But this wasn't just about Lena trying to control my road. It was about something much bigger. Lena had plans for Pine Ridge Estates, plans that didn't involve me or my property. She wanted to turn the area into a luxury gated community with restricted access. And my land, with its prime location and private road, was the perfect spot to expand the development. Lena's real plan was to buy up surrounding properties and build a high-end exclusive neighborhood. To do that, she needed access to my land, and if I didn't give it to her, she'd find a way to take it. I knew I had to act fast. I couldn't let Lena's manipulations continue unchecked. The HOA was no longer just an inconvenience. It was a direct threat to my land, my legacy, and my future. But even as I prepared to take legal action, I started to feel the weight of the pressure. The HOA wasn't just fighting me, it was fighting for control of the whole community. And Lena, with all her power, wasn't going to let up until she had everything in her grasp. The stakes had grown higher. What started as a small dispute over my gate had spiraled into a full-scale battle for my land and my future. The more I dug, the clearer it became that Lena wasn't just a stubborn neighbor. She was a woman with a vision, and she was willing to destroy anyone who got in her way to make it a reality. After uncovering the original developer's documents, I realized Lena's real motivation. She wasn't concerned about aesthetics or property values. No, what she was really after was expanding Pine Ridge Estates into something bigger. She wanted to buy up surrounding properties and turn them into luxury homes, but to do that, she needed access to my private road. The road was the key to her entire vision, and she was willing to push me to the brink to get it. I had thought I could just ride this out, but Lena's actions showed me that she was no longer going to play by the rules. She wasn't just asking for my cooperation. She was actively trying to steal my land. The HOA wasn't a mere inconvenience. It was a weapon in her arsenal, and it had the potential to ruin me if I didn't fight back. I spent the next few nights going through more of my grandfather's papers, searching for anything that could help me fight this battle. And then I found it something that felt like the silver bullet I'd been waiting for. Among the yellowed pages of old property deeds and land surveys, I discovered a clause buried deep within the original developer agreement from 1987. The clause was simple, yet incredibly powerful. It stated that the developers had no right to access my road unless they had explicit written permission from the landowner. The road had always been private, and any attempt to use it for community purposes had to be approved by the owner of the land. In other words, the HOA had no legal right to the road, and Lena's attempts to seize control of it were nothing more than a series of illegal maneuvers. I took this new information straight to Jake, eager for his legal expertise. When I showed him the clause, his face lit up with recognition. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "Lena has no idea what she's up against. This is bulletproof. The road is yours, and there's no way she can take it from you without your consent. If she pushes this, she's opening herself up to a massive lawsuit." But even as Jake spoke, I knew things were only going to get worse. Lena wasn't going to back down easily. She had too much invested in her vision for Pine Ridge Estates, and she wasn't about to let a simple legal fact stop her. So I began preparing for the next phase of the battle. I started collecting more evidence of the HOA's violations, photos, emails, and documents, showing how Lena had manipulated the board to push through her agenda. I even contacted some of the neighbors who had expressed concerns about Lena's methods and got their testimonies. It was clear that Lena wasn't just trying to improve the neighborhood, she was trying to control it, and that control extended to my land. The more I exposed, the clearer it became that Lena's hidden motives were more dangerous than I had ever imagined. She wasn't just fighting for property values, she was fighting for a piece of the real estate market itself. And my land, with its private road, was the cornerstone of her plans. But as I started to assemble my case, I realized something else. Lena had been using the HOA as a shield to hide her true intentions. She had convinced the board members that her vision was for the good of the community, but in reality, it was a well-crafted scheme to line her pockets by expanding the development and increasing property values. She didn't care about the community, she only cared about building her empire. And the worst part was, she was using the HOA to intimidate and harass me into submission. The more I uncovered about her actions, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about a gate or a road anymore, it was about justice. Lena had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. The emotional toll of this battle was starting to get to me. I could feel the weight of the fight pressing down on me, but every time I thought about giving up, I reminded myself that I was standing up for something bigger than myself. This was about protecting my land, my family's legacy, and my right to live in peace. But even as the stakes grew higher, Lena wasn't going to stop. She was pushing the board to escalate the situation, and soon enough, I received another letter from the HOA. This time, it wasn't just about my gate or the road, it was a full-on attack, claiming that my property was compromising the security of the neighborhood. They were accusing me of obstructing emergency access, even though their own actions were the ones blocking it. It was clear that this was no longer a simple dispute, it was a war. Lena had crossed a line, and now I had to decide whether I was going to continue fighting or let her win. But deep down, I knew the answer. I wasn't going to let her take my land, not without a fight. Lena's maneuvering had reached a new level, pulling in the county officials to back her claims. Her aggressive tactics had already manipulated the HOA board, and now it seemed she was doing the same with the county. I knew this wouldn't end with a simple property dispute. The stakes were too high. Lena wasn't just fighting for a gate. She was fighting for control of the entire neighborhood, and my land was the key to her plan. The county inspector Harold Jenkins had arrived at my property earlier that day, and his demeanor made it clear he was uncomfortable, but he was here to do his job. As I walked him through my land, I kept my calm, trying to get through this inspection without giving anything away. "Mr. Carver," Harold said, flipping through the paperwork Lena had submitted, "the HOA's complaint about your property is serious. They claim that your private road and gate are blocking emergency access, which is a major concern for the county. They're saying that fire trucks and ambulances can't get through in case of an emergency." I shook my head in disbelief. "That's a lie," I responded, frustration creeping into my voice. "The road has been here for decades. Emergency vehicles have always had access. What they're doing is nothing more than a power grab. The road's private, and they have no legal right to it. I've inherited this land from my grandfather, and it's always been maintained as private property." Harold's expression softened for a moment, but he quickly masked it with professional indifference. "I'm just following procedure, Mr. Carver. You'll have to work this out at the next hearing. If the county has to get involved, we'll have to act according to what's best for the community." I could see he didn't believe Lena's story completely, but he wasn't about to go against her or the HOA without further instructions. It was clear she had her claws sunk deep into the county now. When the inspector left, I felt a new urgency. I couldn't afford to let Lena win this. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about the gate. Lena's manipulations were jeopardizing the entire neighborhood, and I wasn't going to stand by and let her push me out. She was using her influence to make the county side, with her using my property as leverage to push through her development plans. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and emails, trying to get legal advice, gathering evidence, and digging deeper into the county's involvement. I contacted Jake Morrison again, hoping he would have some advice on how to handle the mounting pressure. "Marcus, you need to keep fighting this," Jake said over the phone, his tone firm. "We have the law on our side. If they try to force the issue, you need to take this to court. We can show the county that the HOA has no right to any of this. But the longer you wait, the harder it will be to undo the damage they've already done." Jake was right. The longer this dragged on, the more Lena was going to get away with. I began documenting everything, every phone call, every letter from the HOA and the inspector's visits. I wasn't just collecting evidence, I was preparing for war. A week later, I received a letter from Lena again. It was formal, full of threats, and dripping with false authority. This time, it wasn't just about my gate or my road. It was about public safety and maintaining community standards. The letter demanded I comply with their new community access plan or face legal consequences, including eminent domain proceedings, if I continued to block access to their so-called public road. The letter made it clear Lena was done with subtlety. She was ready to escalate this into something bigger, something that would put the county in her corner for good. I was tired of playing defense. It was time to take the fight to Lena. I started contacting other residents, asking them if they had experienced any issues with the HOA. Slowly but surely, I began to uncover something I had suspected all along. Lena was using her influence to intimidate and harass other residents too. The stories began to pile up. Neighbors who were afraid to speak out because of the HOA's power families, who were too intimidated to challenge her rules. And then, I found something even more disturbing. The county's records showed discrepancies in the land use files. It turned out that Lena had been pushing through development plans that were not legally approved by the county. She had been working with developers to increase the value of Pine Ridge Estates at the cost of everyone else's property rights. This was no longer just about a gate. Lena was actively engaging in real estate manipulation, and she was using the HOA as her personal tool to control the neighborhood. I had to act fast. The county wasn't going to intervene unless I could prove her fraud. I contacted Eleanor Martinez, a retired paralegal who had lived in the neighborhood for years. She had been one of the few residents who had been vocal against Lena's increasing influence. Eleanor had a knack for research, and she was the perfect ally in this battle. Together, we began digging into Lena's background, her dealings with developers, and the shady deals that had been made under the table. The more we uncovered, the more I realized that Lena wasn't just manipulating the HOA. She had created an entire system of deceit, designed to inflate property values for her personal gain. She wasn't just a bully, she was a con artist, and her entire development plan was based on fraud. The pressure was mounting, but I had something Lena didn't, the truth, and I wasn't going to let her win. By now the war had gone public. I had gathered everything I needed: photos, emails, the forged easement claims, and proof of Lena's manipulation of the HOA board. She'd gone too far, and now I was taking the fight to her. I couldn't wait for the county to step in anymore. I had to make sure the truth was known, and if it meant fighting tooth and nail to protect my land and reputation, I would do it. Eleanor Martinez and I spent late nights preparing. We dug deeper into the records, gathering testimony from residents who had suffered under Lena's reign. The more I uncovered, the clearer it became. Lena wasn't just trying to control the neighborhood. She was trying to control everything. From illegally using my private road for community access to falsifying property values, to sell homes at inflated prices, Lena was building her empire on lies. When the HOA sent their latest letter demanding compliance or face legal action, it felt like a final ultimatum. Lena was pushing all her chips to the center, and I had no intention of backing down. It wasn't just a battle over my gate anymore. It was a battle for my family's land and for the rights of the entire neighborhood. I sent out my own letter to every single homeowner in Pine Ridge Estates. The truth was coming out, and I wasn't going to sit idly by while Lena tried to silence me. The letter was clear. Lena Caldwell's HOA was engaged in fraud, and I had the evidence to prove it. I made sure to include a full explanation of how Lena and the HOA were manipulating property values, selling false promises of road access, and illegally encroaching on my land. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, the story was picked up by local media outlets. The neighborhood was abuzz. For the first time in months, people were talking not about the gate or my supposed violations, but about Lena's manipulation. Neighbors who had once been silent began reaching out, sharing their own stories of how Lena had bullied them into silence. But Lena wasn't backing down. She had spent months trying to control the narrative, and now she was starting to panic. A few days after the media coverage hit, I received a letter from the HOA board. It was an emergency summons demanding I attend a meeting to resolve the situation. It was clear they were trying to get ahead of the narrative, to stop me before the full truth came out. I knew what this was. It was Lena's last-ditch effort to salvage her control over the neighborhood. The meeting wasn't going to be about compromise. It was going to be a desperate attempt to save face and intimidate me into submission. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I had the truth, the community's support, and the law on my side. I showed up to that meeting armed with everything I needed: documents, records, and a plan to expose Lena for who she truly was. When I walked in, I could see the panic in her eyes. She wasn't the confident, smirking woman who had tried to control me months ago. Now she was cornered. I could feel the shift in the room as I laid out the evidence, one piece at a time. The room was silent. I could see the board members squirming in their seats, and I knew it was only a matter of time before Lena's empire started to crumble. She tried to deflect, tried to control the narrative with more of her manipulative tactics, but it was too late. The truth had already been revealed. Lena Caldwell had made the mistake of thinking she was untouchable. She had pushed too far, and now the consequences were catching up to her. The HOA board was scrambling. I could feel the tension in the room like a tightrope stretched to its breaking point. Lena Caldwell, the woman who had bullied, manipulated, and lied her way to the top, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. I stood there in front of the room, documents in hand, calmly presenting every piece of evidence that showed just how deep her corruption ran. I wasn't backing down. The room was split. Some of the board members looked uncomfortable as I laid out the facts: how Lena had used the HOA to line her pockets, how she'd lied to the county, and how she'd manipulated the neighborhood into believing I was the villain. But there were still some board members loyal to her, and I could see the panic in Lena's eyes as she realized her power was slipping away. "Enough, Marcus," Lena said, her voice trembling as she stood up trying to reassert control. "This is a waste of time. The HOA has always acted in the best interest of the community. You're just making things worse with these ridiculous accusations." But her voice was no longer the confident, authoritative tone I had grown so used to hearing. Now it was laced with desperation. I could see the cracks forming in her facade. She wasn't the untouchable, powerful woman she'd thought she was. Now the truth was coming for her. I handed over the evidence: photos of the illegal easement claims, the forged documents, the emails between Lena and the developers, all of it. The room fell silent as everyone took in the weight of what I was presenting. There was no room for her lies anymore. It was all there in black and white. The truth was undeniable. Lena stood there, her face pale, her mouth dry as she tried to think of a response. But the words wouldn't come. Her confidence was gone, replaced by panic. She looked around the room, trying to gauge whether anyone was still on her side. A few of the board members shifted uneasily in their seats, but there was no denying it. Her support was crumbling. "You can't do this," Lena said, her voice shaking now. "You don't understand the damage this will do to the community. You're ruining everything we've worked for." I wasn't going to let her manipulate the room anymore. "You're the one who's been ruining this community, Lena," I shot back. "You've been using the HOA to push your own agenda for months, and now you're going to pay the price for it. This isn't just about a gate anymore. This is about you using your position to exploit people and profit off their backs." You've been lying, manipulating, and bullying everyone in your way. But the truth is coming out, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." Lena tried to respond, but it was clear she was losing control. The board members who had once supported her were now looking at her with suspicion, and a few had already begun whispering among themselves. They had all seen the proof, and it was clear to them that Lena's time was up. "You think you can just walk in here and take everything I've worked for?" she spat, her face contorted in anger. But her voice lacked the conviction it once had. I could see it now. Lena was terrified. She knew her empire was crumbling, and she was grasping at whatever she could to hold on. The meeting dragged on for another few minutes, but the damage was already done. The board had seen the truth, and Lena's facade had shattered. It was only a matter of time before the official proceedings were started. But then Lena did something unexpected. She turned to me, her eyes wild with desperation. "We can still work something out," she said, her voice lower now, as though she was trying to negotiate. "You don't want to take this further. Think about it. You have everything to lose. The HOA can be flexible. We can come to a deal. Just give me a chance to fix this." It was a last-ditch effort, a final attempt to keep control to avoid the inevitable. But I wasn't about to fall for it. Lena had crossed too many lines, and I wasn't going to let her weasel her way out of this one. "No more deals, Lena," I said firmly. "You had your chance to do the right thing, and you chose to lie, cheat, and manipulate. I'm not backing down now. You're going to face the consequences of your actions." I turned to the board. "It's time to do the right thing. You all saw the evidence. It's time to hold her accountable." The room was still the air, heavy with tension, but I could see it now. The end of Lena's reign was near. She had lost the support of the board, and she had no more cards to play. The truth had caught up with her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The sheriff's deputy, who had been quietly observing the meeting, stood up. I knew what was coming next. It was over. Lena Caldwell's time as HOA president was finished. "Mrs. Caldwell," the deputy said, his voice firm, "you are under arrest for fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. You've been involved in illegal activities that have put this community in jeopardy, and you will be held accountable for your actions." Lena's face went white. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Her power was gone, and now she was facing the consequences of her actions. It was over for her. As the deputy approached and placed her in handcuffs, the room erupted in murmurs. Some of the board members looked shocked, while others seemed relieved. The community that Lena had once controlled was now witnessing her downfall. As Lena was led out of the room, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. The battle was over, and I had won. The gymnasium was tense, the kind of silence that settles in when a storm is about to break. I stood in the center, the whole community's eyes on me, watching the fallout of months of conflict unfold. Across from me, Lena Caldwell was preparing for the fight of her life. She was no longer the confident, controlling figure she'd once been. Her smug smile had disappeared, replaced by something darker, more desperate. It was the day of the public HOA meeting, the one where everything would finally come to a head. A full room of residents had gathered to see how this would play out. The local news crews were already setting up their cameras, their lights casting long shadows across the floor, ready to capture the spectacle. The air smelled of nervous energy and stale coffee, and I could feel the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders. The sheriff's deputy was standing at the front, his presence, a quiet reminder that things had escalated well beyond the HOA's usual petty conflicts. Lena had pushed too far, and now the law was involved. Lena's supporters, still loyal to her, sat in the front rows, but I could see the unease in their eyes. Even they knew that Lena's power was quickly evaporating. As I took my place in front of the podium, I could feel the tension building. Lena, seated just a few feet away, looked more like a cornered animal than the woman who had once ruled this neighborhood. Her gaze was cold, but I could see the flicker of panic just beneath the surface. She was about to lose everything: her position, her control, and her reputation. The meeting was underway, and the time had come to put an end to her reign of terror. But this wasn't going to be a simple resolution. I wasn't just going to stand here and let her try to talk her way out of this. Lena had lied, manipulated, and bullied her way into power. It was time to expose her for what she really was. "Miss Caldwell," I said, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "You've had months to explain yourself. You've had every opportunity to do the right thing and step down, but instead, you've continued to lie and manipulate this community for your own gain. It's over." Lena's eyes narrowed, but she didn't respond immediately. She was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to hold on to her power. "What are you accusing me of, Marcus?" she said, her voice trembling slightly, but still dripping with faux sweetness. These are just accusations, unsubstantiated claims from someone who doesn't understand the bigger picture. The bigger picture, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. You've been using your position as HOA president to manipulate the entire community. You've lied about my land, about my gate, and about what's really going on here. You've used the HOA as a tool to enrich yourself and further your own agenda. And now it's time for the truth to come out. The room was silent. Every word I spoke seemed to hang in the air, and I could feel the eyes of the entire community on me. The media cameras clicked and flashed, eager to capture every moment of this public spectacle. It was no longer just about my gate or the road, it was about Lena's manipulation of the entire neighborhood. You think you can come in here and accuse me of fraud? Lena spat, her voice rising now. You're nothing but a troublemaker. You've been obstructing our efforts to improve this neighborhood. You're holding everyone hostage over legal technicalities. You don't care about anyone but yourself. I took a step closer to her, feeling the weight of the situation settle over me. This was it, the moment where Lena would either come clean or be exposed. No, Lena. What you've done is far worse than any technicality. You've been exploiting this entire community for your own gain. You've manipulated the HOA to do your bidding to control everyone in this neighborhood. You've sold false promises to homeowners, promising things you had no right to deliver. And now everyone's starting to see the truth. I reached into my folder and pulled out the key piece of evidence I'd been saving for this moment, the email chain between Lena and the developers, the one that exposed her plans to artificially inflate property values by selling false promises of road access. The room went quiet as I placed it on the table in front of the board members. I could see Lena's face drain of color as the evidence was laid out before her. She knew she had nowhere to hide anymore. This is the truth, I said, letting the weight of the documents sink in. Lena Caldwell has been using this HOA to manipulate and defraud this community. She's been selling properties based on promises of road access that she knew weren't legally binding. She's been lying to every resident here, and now it's time for her to face the consequences. Lena's composure cracked just for a moment, but it was enough to see. She glanced nervously at the board members, who were shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with what they were hearing. This was no longer just a legal dispute, it was a fight for the integrity of the entire community. Lena had used the HOA as her personal tool for too long, and now the entire neighborhood was witnessing her downfall. Now, Lena, I continued, it's time to answer for what you've done. Your actions have put this entire community at risk, and you're not going to talk your way out of this one. The law will have its say. Lena opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. She was defeated, her power slipping away piece by piece. The room had turned against her. The community was no longer afraid of her. They had seen the truth. The tension in the room melted away as Lena was led out by the sheriff's deputy. The crowd, which had once been divided, now seemed united in relief. For the first time in months, Pine Ridge Estates felt lighter. People who had been afraid to speak up now found their voices. Neighbors who had once whispered behind closed doors were now openly exchanging stories about the lies they had lived under. The weight of Lena's oppressive control had lifted, and with it a new sense of freedom was emerging. As I watched Lena's departure, a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion settled over me. Despite everything I'd been through, months of harassment, manipulation, and emotional turmoil, I realized that this victory was about more than just exposing Lena. It was about giving the community back their power. No one would ever have to fear her again. The streets outside seemed quieter, calmer. Neighbors who had once avoided me now came forward to thank me for my persistence. They told me stories of how Lena had threatened them, how she had twisted her position for personal gain, and how they'd been too intimidated to speak up. In some ways, my own victory felt bittersweet. I had spent so many months fighting a system built on lies, and now that it was over, it felt like a strange weight had lifted from my shoulders. I thought of Sarah, her memory always present in my mind. The cabin, once a place of solitude and sorrow, now felt like a home again. The battle had taken a toll, but it had also helped me reclaim what was mine. The legal fallout for Lena was swift. Within weeks, the county had charged her with fraud, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. Her real estate license was permanently revoked, and the State Real Estate Commission began investigating her fraudulent property dealings. Lena's manipulation of the HOA, her falsification of documents, and her promises to developers, none of it was going unnoticed anymore. The HOA, once a tool of Lena's dominance, was now left in disarray. The board was forced to pay restitution for the fines I had incurred, and they were hit with severe financial penalties for their role in supporting Lena's actions. Their funds were drained, leaving them in a position where they couldn't even maintain the properties they were responsible for. The new leadership, led by Eleanor Martinez, immediately implemented reforms. The board was restructured with more oversight, transparency, and accountability. For the first time in years, residents of Pine Ridge Estates were truly involved in decisions that affected them. The community had come together to reclaim what Lena had stolen. As for Lena, the legal repercussions were only beginning. She had underestimated the power of the truth, and now, with the full extent of her fraud exposed, she faced several years in prison. She had gambled everything on her manipulation, and now she was paying the price. Months passed, and the change in Pine Ridge Estates was remarkable. The HOA had been restructured, and for the first time, there was a sense of unity in the community. Eleanor Martinez, now president, ensured that every decision made was voted on by the residents. Transparency was the guiding principle, and no longer would a handful of people make decisions behind closed doors. But it wasn't just the HOA that had changed, the community itself had transformed. The memorial garden I had started for Sarah had grown into a symbol of healing. I added a small gazebo where neighbors now gathered for coffee conversation and community events. What had begun as a personal tribute had evolved into something that brought everyone together. I spent more time in the garden working on my woodworking projects, building benches for the local veterans park. My old dog Justice, who I had adopted during the turmoil, lay by my side, his tail wagging as children ran past him. Life, though not without its scars, had returned to a place of peace. And as I stood by the road once, a symbol of the fight and struggle, I couldn't help but smile. The road that had caused so much pain was now a bridge, not just between properties, but between neighbors. The iron gate that once divided us stood open most weekends. It wasn't just my victory, it was the community's. In the end, it wasn't about the law. It was about the power of a community coming together, refusing to be controlled, and standing up for what was right. The lessons I had learned were clear. It's not enough to fight for your own rights. You have to help others see the truth and stand with them. Lena's reign of terror had ended. The power had shifted not through laws or courts, but through the collective will of the people who had decided enough was enough. This was the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. Pine Ridge Estates was no longer a place of fear, it was a place of hope. Looking back, the win wasn't what mattered most. It was how it all happened through patience, evidence, and the rule of law. If I had let my emotions take over, if I'd acted out of anger or revenge, I might have ended up no better than Lena. But I knew from the start that the only way to truly protect my land, my rights, and this community was by using the legal process, even when it felt slow or frustrating. The system isn't perfect, but it works when you follow it. Standing up for what's right isn't about escalating with force or rage. It's about knowing when to be calm, to document everything, and to present facts that can't be disputed. My anger didn't win the fight, my patience, my paperwork, and my respect for the law did. That's the difference between standing up legally and letting emotions rule the outcome. If you're ever in a similar situation, remember, keep records, check public filings, and always be ready to involve an attorney or relevant authorities when necessary. You don't need to fight every battle alone, and the right legal support can be the difference between winning or losing. Trust the process, and don't let yourself get consumed by the conflict. In the end, communities stay strong when everyone respects the law. HOA power is only as strong as the people who let it grow unchecked. Like that old iron gate that once symbolized division, we have to recognize when to open ourselves to change. We all hold the key.